So what you'll see in today's video is going to be the simplified version of a work session that I've done in the past. And what we're doing is going over how to create this form, how to extrude it, how to select the different faces. And here we have the simplified version. So if you're interested in creating parametric design scripts, that's one of the things that I do is share with you tutorials and resources. And so I created this one for those of you who are excited to learn a little bit more. So let's get into it. All right, so to start, let's first bring in a rectangle. I'll go here and bring in a rectangle component. There are different ways we can create a rectangle, but I'll use this one, which lets you change the location by plugging in a different plane, and also pick a size for the X and a size for the Y. So let's use two different sliders. All right, so this is going to be the base form. We can always change the size because we're using sliders. And now let's create the solid. So we can take this rectangle and extrude it. So I'll go to extrude. The direction, we need to give it a vector. So we're going to use unit Z. I'll just copy one of the for the extrusion in the Z direction. Now notice that when you create a solid, or when you want it to be a solid, and you extrude just the rectangle, it's going to extrude it into an open extrusion. One way to solve this is to turn the rectangle into a boundary surface, or extrude the surface instead of the rectangle. And this then turns that into a solid. I'll disable the preview on these two and then just use this extrusion. Notice that as we move along to the right, we can change all of these and create a different form. Now we need to create a form to subtract from this one. So what I'll do is I'll need to get a point and then move it, but it depends on where you want to create the void. On this one, I'm actually going to use this original point, or where it's located. The way that I'll do this is extract one of the points from this rectangle. So the way to do this is we could either deconstruct the brep, or I like to use discontinuity, which will actually give us a point at every time it turns the corner here. Now that we have these, when you hover over the points, you'll see that we have four. The first one's 0, 0, 0. And then from there, we have the next point. Now to pick just one, I'll go to list item. And with list item, I can just pick one of the points. And I can also change that point. So here, I can bring in a slider, let's say of 2. So we can change which of the points we pick. So here we have this second point, which is 1, the first one, which is 0, and we can kind of cycle through them. We can only have 3 different points. So we can change the slider either by double clicking and changing the min and maximum, or we can also create a custom slider between 0, less than 1, and less than 3. And it will set it at 1 and give you a range from 0 to 3. Let's go here to 0. Now we're going to be creating another rectangle. Now we can use this rectangle component, and it's going to be creating it in the positive direction, or we could also move this point to create a rectangle. What I'll do is I'll just use, actually, I'll be taking this point and moving it here in positive X and positive Y. So I'll go here to move. And then I'll bring in a vector X, Y, Z. The reason why is because here you only have one direction, and here we can plug in more than one direction. I'll plug in the point into the geometry and then the vector into the motion. And now we can create movement using a slider here. So I'll move it positive X, positive Y. Now you'll see that we're basically moving that point. Now, if we change this point to be on this side, well, then the point that we move sits outside. So this is where we can have this be positive and negative, a range of -1,000 to 1,000, and then here from -1,000 to 1,000. Why? Because if we move it to this point, then we can also move this in the negative direction. Same thing with this one. So this lets you be able to pick that point and move it wherever you want it to subtract the form. So let's say that that's kind of the location of where we want it to be. Of course, we can always change it. So now that we have these two, let's create a rectangle. But this time the rectangle is going to be 2 points. So you can create a rectangle that's based off of 2 points. We're going to start with this one, point A, and this one for point B. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did up here, which is turn it into a surface, a boundary surface, and then extrude it up. But when you already have created that step, we can actually just take this, slide it over. When you tap Alt, you'll create a copy. Now we can use this surface or this rectangle to turn into a surface and then extrude it up. Since we copied the slider and it's the same number as this height, well, obviously we need to decrease that. And with that, we have created two overlapping forms. We can subtract one from the other. So I'll go here to difference, solid difference, this one, and now notice that we still have the steps before the subtraction. That's where we can select those and disable preview. And the reason for that is because now we can move this around and we can see the final step. We can also move this over the next one and notice that nothing's going to happen because it creates it out here, but we can still move this back. This. Now the depth of it, we can change as well. So that. And the cool thing about this is if you want to tie it to be exactly in the middle, well, let's say this is 500 wide, X direction. Well, we can say 500, bring in a component that divides by 2. So when I go divide by 2, it's going to give me a component that is a division, puts 2 in the B. Now A is going to be 500, which divides it by 2, gives us 250. And we can override the X direction with half of the size. Now notice that it's not going to work because it's going positive. So this is where we would bring in a negative component to turn 250 into negative 250. And now it's always going to be exactly in the middle, no matter how wide we make it. So one of the cool things about parametric tools is that you can tie numbers together. And that makes it useful because depending on what you want the final outcome to be, always want it to be in the middle, then you only focus on this slider and not necessarily having to use a completely different slider for the X direction. But in my opinion, one of the cool things is that you can tie, you have negative 255, half of that. And we can also say plus or minus. I'll just go to plus. And then here, I'll have this at 0. So if we have 250, or let's just do this an even number, we'll go 500 divided by 2 equals 250. 250 plus 0 equals 250. Now we turn it here into a negative. But the cool thing is that now we can say, okay, shift it by, 100 to the left or shift it 100 to the right. So this is where we can, rather than have a floating number, we can always have it in the middle. And then this becomes what shifts it left or right from the center. Here's the thing. I typically don't label them until the end. And the reason why is because notice that I always copy sliders. And if I copy them already labeled, then I'm doing twice the work. And sometimes that confuses me because I kind of go a little bit quick and I don't want to lose my, I don't want to get confused. So I tend to just do it like this. And then later on, relabel this shift center form. Now that we have this, created the base form, let's now, nicing it a little bit here so it's too messy. Now we're going to look at this form and we're going to extrude some of the sides and some of the bottom parts to turn this into a solid, right? This is already a solid, but we want to turn these into walls, this into a roof, this into a little roof, and so on. First, what we need to do is explode this, but in Grasshopper, parametrically, you don't explode it, you deconstruct the BRET. Notice that now they're overlapping. So what I'll do is I'll disable the preview on this one. And now I need to pick one of these sides. We'll start with the sides first. So to pick each side, we first need to know how they're arranged. Now we can go here to list item and cycle through them and see it visually, plug in all the faces. Now we're just picking first one, which is index of 0. I can go bring in a slider of 5 and then 0. I can cycle through them to see where they are, but that's sometimes not the best way to do that. Here's why. Because now I think the best way to do that is going to be, I'll delete this for now. We need to know the numbers of the 9 of the different surfaces that we have. So the way that I like to do this is bring in an area component, which is going to give us the center of each face. And when we do that, then we can see how they're numbered by bringing in a point list. I'll use the centroid as the point input. And notice that we're getting a number in here, but it's a little small. So let's go here, change the size. Now we can see the number of every side, and this makes it a lot easier to be able to extract and pick one of those faces, because what we can do is bring in the list item again, and I usually type in item, use the list item component, plug the face in, and now we're going to start with 1, then 3. So this is how I do it. Quotation marks, 1. This gives me a panel with a number 1 inside. Now we have the first one picked. Now we're going to get the third one. So rather than using a slider, because the slider the change, and we know these are going to be consistent, I'll take this down, tap Alt, bring in the third one. So now we have both sides here. Now we're going to bring in the sixth one. This one, down, tap Alt, 6. And I can disable the preview on this just to see the faces that I'm extracting. What I need to do is extrude 3 in the X direction. So let's do that. 1 in the negative X direction. Go to extrude for 1. in the X direction. And the way that I see what direction I'm using is by looking at the X, Y, Z coordinate system here. So we're going to use -x. Now there's also a way to extrude perpendicular to that phase, but there's a few other steps. And for now, we'll simplify it and extrude in the negative. Now use a new slider here. We'll go 24. Three, we're also going to do that one. So take this, copy it, extrude 3, but in the positive direction. Instead of negative, divide with the positive. Now 6 is going to be an interesting one because if we extrude it to the inside, then we'll have a gap here at the top, because if we extrude it to the inside, this one will extrude up. And so there's going to be like a missing portion. So we're actually doing this the same as 3. Going to be in the positive. Now notice that every one of these has a different slider. And the idea here is that I could have just copied everything except for the slider. Now we can share this slider as the depth for the sidewalls. So let's make it here 24. All right. Now we're going to be extracting the top and 7. So that's going to be 4 and 7. Do that. I like to create a space just so you know that different these. Here we'll go to 4. Now I'll extrude this one. Here's the thing. We're going to extrude it. I'll copy this. Instead of using X, I'll use Z because we need to extrude it up. Now I'll use that surface. So slide this back. Everyone organizes their scripts a little bit different. I just try to make sure that they're not overlapping, and if they are, sometimes I hide the input. This goes up 24, but let's make it less. 16. Now we're going to do 7 by the same amount. So notice on the last one I copied the slider. On this one I'll show you that copy all of this without the slider, which means that the slider still is part of the input. Now let's change 4 to 7. Now we have extruded 7, we've extruded 4. And now we're going to extrude 8, but down. So now we'll take this, copy it, and use Notice though that here we have a part that's missing. So instead of using this extrusion with this surface, why don't we go back to our original one and extrude that down instead. So what I'll do is I'll override the surface that we picked out, that's 8, actually going to be using that original surface. Notice how this wire goes all the way over here. That's where I tend to go to wire display, hidden. And this makes it easier to kind of visualize. Now you can always select this, like when you see that symbol, select it, and then you'll see that where it goes. Now at this point, I want to look at the form and I want it to be clean. So what I'll do is I'll disable the preview on all of this, including the point list. And now this is going to be the fun part. So you can see the final result, but also have the ability to change the initial portions. So what happens here is if you're new and you haven't seen how parametric design works, you go from left to right. And so the things that happen at the beginning react or change the things that we create at the end. And that's kind of the fun part about this, is that depending on how you want to program your design, you need to make sure you have your initial steps done correctly. And for the most part, once you've done things correctly from the beginning, like let's say by adding all of these features of being able to shift it, then here it's a matter of taking that form and extracting the geometry and then building off of it. So I'm using this as a simplified version of the tutorial that I just shared. It wasn't really a tutorial, it was a work session where I worked out this idea. But here I wanted to slow it down, simplify it for those of you who are interested in creating parametric scripts like this. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, stay tuned for other videos. I post videos every week showing you different exercises. Sometimes I don't talk during my videos, and that's because I'm working out the idea. But I want to go back and simplify a lot of these exercises to show you the beginning steps, and then later on you'll be able to combine a lot of these tricks and techniques to create more complex designs. So thank you very much for being here. Hopefully you're excited to learn a little bit more, and I hope to see you in the next video. So here at the end, what I'm going to do is clean up some of the work here. So what I do is I right click on the slider and change the name. So I'll call this X size, Y size. And sometimes you'll see that I group the slider. And that's because I want to be able to see the sliders and which ones are the ones that change the design. And you can also change the color. I have this one as green. You can change the color and make it as default. That also, depending on what color you want to use, this is going to be the height. This is going to be form shift. This one is going to be which point we select. Now, sometimes you want it to be consistent so you can internalize the data. So it always picks that point, but we could also make it so, let's say here, actually you have to make it internalize if that's the design you want. Because if you don't, then the way that this is organized is going to change. So we'll make it consistent. We'll disable the preview here. This is going to be the depth form, action depth. And this one is going to be subtraction height. When the wire goes too far, hide it. Even here, when you have too many, we'll hide the input. Like I said, we can always bring it back, but this keeps it clean. Hide the going to be the roof / floor depth. Going to be that's going to be the wall depth. And this is something that I don't preview, but I could keep it here just in case I need to preview it and change which one of these are the ones that are the walls and the roof. Now with these, I can also, oh, here's a trick. If I want these to line up, I'll select them and go to the left or to the right to line them up. Same with these. I'll select them, use the right arrow, and it'll snap them to the right. It also keeps it clean. Now here, right, here we have the walls, roofs. Now I can keep these as extrusions, but I like to keep it, to organize it. You don't have to do this. And use a geometry component, an empty geometry component. And I can plug that in here and group it. And then just do that as the output, because I want to show like this is a geometry that I want to use rather than an extrusion component, which is not a big deal, just a personal preference. And this is not going to affect the design. It's going to affect how you organize it. Group this, right? And disable the preview on this. Otherwise there will be overlap. All right, so with that, I think we're done with cleaning up the script. Like I said, thank you for being here. If you want to download this, I'll have this available on my website. And I hope to see you again in the next video.